Okay, Alexander, let's talk about France once again, and this time the European Union coming to Macron's aid, to his rescue. And I'm going to read you a title from Summit News, which says Michel Barnier calls for 3 to 5 year suspension of immigration into the European Union, cites threat of terrorists and criminals exploiting sieve borders. Alexander, what the timing of this is interesting, to say the least, given Macron's big troubles in France.
It's absolutely fascinating, but can I just also add that Barnier said something else, which as a Briton, I particularly feel about. He was also hinting that there might be a case for suspending the operation of the Schengen zone, and that free movement within the Union is something that perhaps isn't an entirely good idea at all times. He didn't say a permanent abolition of the Schengen zone, but a temporary suspension of it. Now, of course, when we had all those negotiations over Brexit, we were endlessly told in Britain by none other than Michel Barnier that the Schengen zone was sacred and couldn't be touched in any way, shape or form. And it turns out that isn't quite the case. So I just mentioned that little point just to give some idea to our viewers of the sort of person we're talking about. Well, Michel Barnier is a top EU official. He's the EU's top trade negotiator. He was in charge of the trade negotiations and the Brexit negotiations with Britain. And of course, he is French, and he is also somebody who is extremely close to the French establishment. And in fact, he is absolutely a part of the French establishment. The French establishment senses that Emmanuel Macron is in very serious trouble. I've seen more poll readings, by the way. They're difficult always to decipher in France, but I have absolutely no doubt that the real polls are now showing Marine Le Pen ahead in polling for the second round. They also show that Marine Le Pen is winning strongly amongst younger people who in France have, as in most countries, traditionally voted left. She's now got a strong lead amongst 20-year-olds, for example, 25 to 30-year-olds. And I think that he realizes, as other members of the French establishment do, that one of the big issues that is giving Marine Le Pen lots of traction with more and more parts of French society is immigration into France, and the general perception in France, discussed in those letters recently, for example, by those French military people, that France is experiencing immigration that it can't control, with the emergence of these immigrant-dominated suburbs in many French cities, which are outside the control of the French state and which are effectively challenging French society and French culture and people's ideas in France of what France is. So he now sees this as a threat to Macron and to the dominance within France of the globalist, integrationist agenda, of which Barnier is, of course, a fervid and determined advocate. So what he is now doing, and it reeks of panic, is he says, well, Macron can't do anything about immigration into France from outside France because France doesn't control its borders, the EU does. So what we do is we stop all immigration across the EU for a period of 5 years. The real purpose of doing that is to help Emmanuel Macron win this increasingly difficult election against Marine Le Pen. Now, I don't personally think this idea has any hope of success. I don't think the Germans, for example, will support it, but it is an indication of how desperate the French elite is becoming about the trend of opinion in France itself, and whether these sort of gimmicks would succeed or not, the very fact that Barnier and people like him are talking in this way shows how the extent to which they sense that things are now slipping out of control.
Yeah, I agree. It's the first indication, in my eyes, that the globalists and the elites in Europe are starting to panic. And it shows that they will do anything. They'll pull out all the stops to make sure that Macron somehow wins the election in the coming year. But it also shows that, back with Hollande, they had some options, i.e. Macron. They said, okay, this guy, we'll find a replacement to shoehorn into office because, the Hollande government was just awful, and we'll find that puppet to put in his place. They don't have another option now. It looks like they're all in with Macron, and they're gonna start scrambling now going forward to do everything in their power to make sure that Le Pen loses and Macron wins. They're going to do everything they can to make sure that happens.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to make an observation about these letters from the French soldiers, because I think that this is, in fact, directly related to what you said. And I should say that in saying this, I'm basing what I'm going to say on some things that I've heard from France, but which I have to stress, I don't know necessarily how, I can't confirm them. But what I'm getting a sense of is that these letters from the French soldiers were provoked precisely by the things that you have just said, a sense of desperation by the French elites, and a feeling that those elites are going to do everything they can to retain control, with a fear on the part of sections of the French military that the elites are going to use or try to use the military to retain control. In other words, that if a Macron government wins an election and then runs into protests because people across France don't accept the outcome of the election, then they might want to try and use the military to contain it. And that the worry about that has now communicated itself across the military, and we're seeing these letters from the French soldiers in a way as a warning that the military won't be used in that way. So that gives you a sense of how desperate the elite is starting to look in France, how they've run out of options, how they haven't found an alternative to Macron. They haven't come up with a second Macron that they could put in place of the first Macron. And at the same time, the concerns that may exist on the part of some parts of French society, including the army, that they will not only use every method that they can to retain power, but that they will go beyond conventional methods, commonplace in France, of electoral and political manipulation, but that they will try to use the army itself and the forces of control to retain control too. That gives you a sense of how fraught the situation in France has become.
Yeah, so the EU is being mobilized to help Macron. They're trying to get the army involved to help Macron, but it looks like the army is saying no chance. I'm sure they'll look at the election process. I'm sure they'll dig in there, and everyone knows what I mean when I say that. And then you get to what I think will be the next part of their plan, which will be the media and smearing Le Pen. But then I think to myself, they've thrown everything at her already.
Absolutely.
And she's still around. So what do you think of that they're going to start to mobilize the media to really go hard after destroying, to go hard to destroy Le Pen? And do they have anything? Or will they fabricate stuff?
Well, I mean, the trouble is, you see, they've done this for so long with Le Pen now that I suspect she's practically proof against it. There comes a point where the more smears you throw against someone, provided that person is tough, like Le Pen is, and doesn't crumble under the smears in the way that Corbyn, say, did in Britain. But Le Pen is a tough character. She's survived many smears up to now. The more smears you throw, the more people cease to believe them and start to actually suspect you. So that I think is the point which we've now crossed. I don't think there's any conceivable way that they can launch a media campaign against Le Pen which is going to be effective. What can they say about her that they haven't already said? They called her a racist, they called her a fascist, they've called her an agent of Putin, they said that she's on Putin's payroll, they've criticised her.
They tried to arrest her?
They tried to arrest her, they've tried to prosecute her, they've accused her of financial misdeeds, they've accused her of electoral misdeeds. None of it has stuck. None of it has dented her popularity for any length of time. I mean, so what more can they say beyond what they've said already? I suppose, if they sort of rake up stories, that she's got, corpses in her basement or something, I don't know. I mean, it would have to be something completely wild. And even then, I wonder whether people would believe it.
They've already played the Russia card with Le Pen as well, haven't they? Yeah,
absolutely, they have. Absolutely. Well, that is one of the most interesting things about it, because, of course, she's actually turned that round. I mean, she's not in any way backed off from the fact that she wants better relations with Russia. During the last French presidential election, which she was in the second round, she actually went to see Putin. So, I mean, and it hasn't in the end damaged her. So it's difficult to see what more they can say about Le Pen that they haven't already said. And I think that they really run out of road there. The other possibility is that they will try, and I think this is more likely and in fact more dangerous, is that they will try and fabricate some kind of financial scandal. I say fabricate because if there really was something, by now they'd have found it and they'd have used it long ago. So it's difficult to imagine that there's anything by now that is really there that they don't really know about. So, they may try something like that. But the problem with that is that given the mood in France at the moment, again, I suspect vast numbers of French people will reject it. And using the judiciary, the French judiciary, in that way will further undermine the legitimacy of the French state, which is already shaken by the way the institutions of the French state were misused during the Gilets jaunes protests. So they're in a very tight hole. I mean, they've still got ample cards to play. They got the European Union, that they're going to try and mobilise behind them. As you said, that's what the Barnier business is all about. And they've got other things they can do. But it's looking harder for them with every day now.
All right, we'll continue to follow this story, and we'll wait for what scandal they're going to fabricate against Le Pen. Let's wait and see what they come up with. All right, guys, look for us on Odyssey, on BitChute, on SuperU, and on Locals, where we're doing exclusive videos all the time on those platforms. So check us out there. You'll find the links down below, and 10% off of all Duran merch when you use the code REALNEWS. You'll find that link down below as well. Take care.